Hello, welcome to this Lunch and Learn session. I'm Matt Chandler, Director of Mechanical Engineering here at Team Consulting, and today I'm going to talk about early stage demonstrators and in particular one for a diagnostics project. These are things I'm going to cover: why develop a demonstrator, and then the main part will be an example, part of a fluorescent assay, and then I'll conclude with some good things to remember. So why develop a demonstrator? First of all, I think it's applicable to lots of different areas of technical development, not just diagnostics. And I think that's really because the main reason to develop a demonstrator is to reduce technical risks. This is especially important when doing something new or for the first time in the intended application. The development of assays often take place in quite a different environment using standard lab equipment compared to what's perhaps envisaged for the integrated product. So early stage demonstrators provide an opportunity really to bring together parts of the workflow, test technology interfaces, and to start to understand some of the key elements of the control and detection systems. And that could be critical for the assay development itself, allowing data to support the detection technique or combining those workflow steps. And a development project will have key milestones, and developing a demonstrator early gives something tangible at those points to show investors or project sponsors. So the example that I'm going to talk about today is part of a fluorescent assay. We had a project which was identifying fluorophores, and the main issue that we had was that they were clumping, and we needed to provide an accurate quantitative measurement, particularly at low levels of detection and at a low volume. This is all taking place in a microfluidic consumable, and at the time the measurement was at a point when the flow was static. So what if we could do that when the particles were moving? So the idea here being that if we could actually generate some flow in the microfluidic consumable and count the particles while they're moving, we should see fewer issues with clumping. So how are we going to demonstrate this? So we set out some objectives to develop a test rig with the aim of trying to track and quantify moving fluorescent particles in the microfluidic channel. And we had a bit of a stretch goal here to try and discern between different colors of fluorophores and potentially different sizes. We also wanted to keep the development time and cost to a minimum. So a few of us got together and we started to think about how we might go about doing this, and one of the team highlighted the inspiration for this this demonstrator in the form of a camera on a robot that was able to track and identify, in this case, quite large balls that have been poured onto a desk. And so I think this is a really key part of developing a demonstrator quickly, which is to try and make use of existing technology, possibly if it's being used in a different application. So this gave us the nugget of what we could try out. We had a few things that we needed to change, but it gave us a clue that this should be possible. So we started with quite a simple setup. We actually started with some static, some slides, trying to get the optical setup set up so that we could test out the idea of using a low-cost camera, in this case a Raspberry Pi, with some simple magnification, illumination, and filters. This sort of highlighted that we needed to do a bit more work, particularly around introducing fluid flow in a controlled way, reducing the depth for the depth of field for the optics, and getting the resolution so that we can actually pass that through to an image processing algorithm. This was the rig that we came up with. So it's a combination of things that are off the shelf, like the optical system, put together with all off-the-shelf lenses and filters. We used a off-the-shelf microfluidics cartridge, and for the flow, we used a standard pump, but we did need to improve the control of that pump. Together with some 3D printed parts and some XYZ stages so that we could control the position, we had ourselves something that we could actually work with and play around with. So a few challenges on the way. Fluorescent detection at a low cost is quite challenging, so we wanted to work with a range of different fluorophores, from 7.5 microns to down as small as 0.2. So we set up effectively a simple microscope with a broad spectrum UV light source to excite the range of fluorophores, and with a filter prior to the camera. And this really simplified the optical setup and provided us with a lot of different options. Achieving the fluid flow control proved more challenging than we expected, and in this case we had a low cost peristaltic pump, but it wanted to ideally flow at much higher flow rates than we wanted, and the pulsatile nature of that pump was less desirable when we actually came to kind of looking at the particles. So we designed a small little damper to smooth out the flow, and that worked out really well. So the other key part of the rig was to create some software. So we decided to employ some machine learning. We labeled about 1,000 images and used a neural network to train and recognize the different colors and their positions, and then we could deploy that on the Raspberry Pi controller. So the little software here, it allows you to select the size and the location of the region of interest to analyze the particles. It detects the particles in the frame as they move, and then counts the particles as they cross the line. Using a neural network does offer some good advantages. There's no once we trained the algorithm, there was no fine tuning or further analysis needed, and no post processing required. So if we continued to train the algorithm on an even broader set of images, then that would give us even more flexibility. So the overall outcome was a pretty sophisticated bit of kit. It worked really well at differentiating between the different coloured fluorophores and attached particles, and we did all that in a fraction of the time and cost that it would have taken to develop that into a full system. And as well as proving out the concept of identifying and tracking the moving particles in real time, it really helped us understand some of the other parts of the assay, including the mixing and interactions in the microfluidic channel. So that ultimately helped not just develop and improve the technology, but also improve the assay performance. I'll summarise with some good things to think about when considering how a demonstrator might help you in your development. And I think really you have to focus on the key risk areas. There's little point in spending time and efforts working on things that exist or have already been proven. That's where things like off-the-shelf modules really come in. Development kits, in our case, a Raspberry Pi, really helped move the development on without having to develop a lot of new things. I think one of the ways of kind of trying to think about the areas on which to focus on are looking at a system architecture, thinking about the assay workflow, and determine the kind of the maturity of technology, whether it's been developed or not, and the technology readiness of areas that have been developed. That's a really good way of highlighting the areas that need further work. An example might be a new fluidic cartridge with a clever chip to detect a key analyte, but moving the fluid to the chip might not have been done. There's lots of different example products doing exactly that, suggesting that that's not, quite a mature technology to do that, but the detection method itself might be very novel and still needs proving. So that suggests that's where early development efforts should be focused, and demonstrators should be developed accordingly. And at some point in the future, the transfer of fluid might be included in those demonstrators. I think it's important to think about what's valuable, think about the areas of technology that jump development forward, thinking about what's needed to get to that next milestone. What are the investors or the product sponsors looking for? And finally, this example that I talked about, it really highlighted the need for a range of different skills to complete. So it's really worthwhile trying to get input from a range of disciplines when trying to put together a demonstrator. And that's particularly important when, say, for example, a mechanical engineer might not have the same appreciation of the ease or difficulty to work out how to analyze their images. And so that was a really fundamental part of putting together this demonstrator. Thank you very much.
When can a diagnostic medical device be classed as a non-medical consumer product, if at all?
This is quite an interesting point. I think when you kind of look at the regulation, there's sort of two elements to in vitro diagnostics, and the first bit is the sample that you're taking, and then the second is the purpose. So in vitro diagnostics, that's taking a sample from a human, and then it has to have a medical purpose as well. So I guess if we think about how that might be not a medical device, then we're kind of thinking about things where we might want to assess or record some information, and the purpose then needs to be not medical. Some of the kind of the wearables kind of sit on the kind of the edge of a medical device, because they're it's not in vitro, because they're not taking a sample and testing something away from the body, and equally the result that they're providing isn't a kind of a medically actionable result. So I think the guidelines are reasonably clear. It needs to be a medical device is something for an in vitro medical device is that you're taking a sample and you're analysing it with a medical purpose.
Awesome, thanks for that. So someone else has asked, what are the common mistakes that hardware startups make when building a works like prototype?
I think the biggest thing that we see, not just startups, but any company that's trying to develop demonstrators and develop technology is really to kind of go too complex too soon. I think it's a difficult thing to balance, because even in the example that I talked about, there were a number of different facets that needed to be brought together to make that demonstrator work. But I think the key is to try and kind of make use of existing technology as far as possible, and focus on the areas where it is a big risk, and then thinking later on about perhaps augmenting that in with further it might be interfaces to other parts of the system. But I think it's that going too complex too soon is probably the biggest thing that we see.
Excellent, thanks for that. So someone else has asked a question about the demonstrator. So what development stages are suitable for a demonstrator?
So I think we often see demonstrators kind of coming in quite early on in the development process. So what we were talking about here was really something that's kind of I guess proof of concept before you kind of go towards detailed design phase. And I think that's the obvious fit for demonstrators, but I don't think it's the only place, because demonstrators can also be used later on in the development. They might be to do with the manufacturing process, or there might be some key part about or solving a particular technical challenge that might come much later on in the development, and at a much more mature point. So I think it can be at different stages, but I think the logical place that it sits is earlier on.
Right. So another question we have is, this is specific to fluidics. How would you go about incorporating cartridges or consumables into a demonstrator?
So this does come up quite frequently with diagnostics projects, and in the example that we used here, we actually used off-the-shelf fluidic cartridges, because we didn't need to have anything too complicated with what we were doing. So rather than trying to develop something from scratch, there are companies that can provide these things, and quite a range of different applications without having to do too much. So it is worthwhile kind of looking to see what's available without having to kind of manufacture or design. And it might not fit exactly what's needed in the first instance, but it probably gets things moving and helps to understand the kind of the downstream requirements. And then after that, I think there's a range of different techniques that can be employed, and it depends on what the requirements might be for the fluidics, whether it's kind of the surface finish is really important, or the material for optical performance. So we can see some machining, some of the 3D printing or SLA models are capable of doing fluidic applications, and what's quite interesting is some of the kind of there's some micro SLA capabilities which for really small features may be applicable to a particular application. So there's lots of different ways to do it, and I think it's the challenge is trying to kind of pick from the kind of the menu of what might be the most appropriate.
Excellent, thanks for that. So we've got a couple more questions. So someone's asked, apart from proving the concept, how else does a demonstrator support translating into a product?
So I think it's, whenever developing a demonstrator, it's always good to have that product in mind. The vision of what you're trying to achieve needs to be kind of reasonably well established. But the key thing with the demonstrator, it allows you to explore and kind of work out some of the parameters. Once you've established a level of proof in terms of the concept that you're trying to develop, you can start to then kind of explore some of the boundaries about what works and what doesn't work, and that then can feed directly into your requirements and your specification. And it's some of that testing I think is really quite important, because not everything will go as planned. Quite often there'll be some things that don't behave exactly how you might expect, and it's important to kind of be really observant at that stage and try and see kind of what and understand why things behave or interact as they do, because they may either be kind of little flags to think about later on in the development, or they might again in some circumstances provide an opportunity. Certainly I've seen that before, where playing around you see almost that kind of eureka moment of that wasn't what I was expecting, but it really provides you with something more than what you were expecting.
Excellent. So the last question we have here is, how do you maximize the value of a demonstrator without making it too complex?
Well, that is really difficult, because I think it's captured with a whole load of different kind of aspects of a product development. As I kind of alluded to in the talk, some of it depends on the value to the stakeholders of the program. I think the key thing is about doing testing and sort of, I guess, developing it and evolving it to a point where it's kind of shown and demonstrated as much as it can do, before perhaps moving on to maybe it's a more sophisticated demonstrator, or maybe it is the first prototype of your product. I think where you have consumables, and you might have more of a kind of a breadboard demonstrator interacting with that consumable, I think there's huge value throughout the development to be gained. It might be kind of software development platform, or it might be ultimately kind of an in-house test rigs, because perhaps the demonstrator itself has more capability than the final product ultimately has. So I think that there's lots of little ways that can maximize the value, but ultimately I think it is asking that question: if can we learn more, or does that fulfill the needs of the stakeholder, and is there more that we can add without making it too complex.